every organization and even lots of individuals in our world, from corporations to political parties to influencers to YouTube channels, social media platforms, whatever it might be, they're all trying to command as much attention as possible because that's monetizable, right? We're in a sort of an economy of influence, a culture of influence.
Vidyarthi is a technology designer, author, and mindfulness practitioner who helps people develop healthier relationships with technology. In this wide-ranging conversation, we explore how to reclaim our attention and well-being in an increasingly digital world.
I grew up with tech, right? I grew up playing video games till my eyes turned red. But as I started to find a spiritual path and practices of mindfulness and ways to heal some of the challenges that I've inherited and some of the challenges I've discovered and faced in my life, I was kind of stretched between two worlds because I work in technology and I love to play video games, but I also like to go on silent retreats and like practice self-awareness and explore the territory of the mind.
Rather than seeing technology as inherently good or bad, Jay shares a more nuanced perspective on how we can engage with our devices mindfully.
The goal is not to shut your mind up, right? The goal is not to stop thinking. That would be like telling a chicken not to cluck, right? It's like who we are. Thinking is who we are. And in that way, I really do believe technology is kind of who we are.
Jay reveals how we can transform our relationship with technology to avoid compulsive habits and experience genuine connection in digital spaces.
The issues of the attention economy are happening in your kitchen. They're happening in your living room. They're happening in your bedroom. These are areas where, sure, there's a norm and there's systems, but you are not powerless. Far from it. Your ability to relate with those situations is a matter of choice, and it's also a matter of skill.
Before we get into this conversation, I want to ask you to join this amazing community of consciousness explorers. This whole idea of pursuing expanded consciousness and the boundaries of human potential while living a modern life is relatively new, which is why we interview revered masters, teachers, experts, and practitioners to help you on your own journey. To stay up to date on the latest conversations, simply click subscribe below and you'll be notified each time a new episode comes out. I am so grateful for all of your support and comments. I love reading them. Now let's dive into this conversation. Jay, what's going on, man?
Hey, good to see you, man.
Good to see you. And I'm just like really excited about today's discussion because this topic is so alive. I was at a men's group last night and people were talking about this idea that, you know, they feel like they're kind of at war with billions of dollars and resources that are being put behind these technologies that are kind of intended to capture our attention for whatever interests those companies have. And I got the sense that a lot of people kind of felt helpless and weren't really sure, like, I want to be mindful. I want to have a good relationship with technology, but I don't really know how. And I feel like I'm outgunned. I think that was actually the exact word. And so
Wow.
I guess I would just be curious just to kick it off. Like, what is the backdrop of the current technological environment as it relates to our attention?
Yeah. So you may have heard the term, we live in an attention economy. And what this basically refers to is that every organization and even lots of individuals in our world, from corporations to political parties to, influencers to YouTube channels, social media platforms, whatever it might be, they're all trying to command as much attention as possible because that's monetizable, right? We're in a sort of an economy of influence, a culture of influence. A couple hundred years ago, the idea of marketing would be putting a sign out in the town square or something visible to let people know that you have a business or that you're running for office. But now, using the most sophisticated technology the world has ever seen, every message you get is part of an almost militaristic campaign to target your desires and insecurities and fears and influence your behavior through commanding your attention. And this is especially problematic because attention is so critical to well-being that we end up scattered and kind of lost. But in terms of your intro and this men's group you were at, like I feel that that's sort of why I wrote the book that I wrote. But the words like outgunned and ideas about war, the war of our attention, and this feeling of like adversarial nature, I think misses something really important, that like this technology is who we are. And it's just a matter of like manifesting some of our own challenging societal systems and values on a macroscopic scale. So it's not a kind of us against them. This is all of our technology, and all of us are a part of this system of interconnection that we've created, and it has some problems.
Yeah, what's really interesting to me that's coming up is, psychedelics have been described as a non-specific amplifier. And so really what they're doing is they're showing you something in your consciousness that's already there. And like our consciousness, our systems, our societal structures created this. It's not the technology itself, and just the sophistication of it is just amplifying a lot of those dynamics. And so, yeah, you're right. It's a really interesting point that we are immediately jumping to point the finger at the technology and our relationship with it versus us, as as human beings, as the creators and wielders of these things up to this point.
Yeah, it's both. Like, I don't want to absolve bad actors of the responsibility and accountability to design ethical technology. I don't want to absolve regulators to be looking at the science and thinking about this, and of course, scientists to be studying the effects. But what I basically want to point at is, as individuals, we're not helpless the way it may have sounded on your men's group. There's so much we can do. I mean, if um, my entire adult life I've been exploring mindfulness practice, and if I've learned one thing from mindfulness practice, it's that I always have some semblance of controlling how I relate to my experience, whatever that experience might be. So as much as this technology is coming from our systems, it's also attracting us based on our desires and our emotional needs, and it's quite integrated in all those ways. And so we kind of need to be working on all these fronts. And so I'm not trying to say that the technologists are innocent in creating these things, though I would say in the vast majority of the case, no one is trying to create mental health problems in children or adults, right? No one's trying to do that, I don't think. But, maybe one person is, but you know what I mean? Like, most people are not. But, I think as individuals, we also have a role to play. That's all I'm saying, is that we do need to be looking at these systems and how they need to change, but we don't need to use that fact to feel disempowered as individuals. There's so much we can do in our own lives to reclaim our minds, really, and like find balance and mindfulness in our relationship with technology, not just hiding away from it.
Yeah. And I think this is also particularly prescient because it seems like there's this polarity that is going on right now, where there's a group of more and more people are saying, we need to get back to the old ways. Tech is bad. And then there's the kind of techno optimists. And I think what you're saying is like, there actually can be a middle ground, and we can have agency and empowerment in that middle ground. And it's just kind of up to us to claim that, and mindfulness being a pathway to do that.
Yeah, I sort of had no choice to land here. That's kind of how I feel about it, because I grew up with tech, right? I grew up playing video games till my eyes turned red. I, chatted with girls on ICQ. Like, that was my high school flirting, was not face to face as much as it was through early text messaging platforms. And like, technology's been a part of my life from the beginning as a millennial, right? But as I started to find a spiritual path and practices of mindfulness and ways to heal some of the challenges that I've inherited, and some of the challenges I've discovered and faced in my life, and processed, the grief of that, and worked through meaninglessness and tried to find purpose, and also fallen in love with this way of being that is more grounded in the present moment with awareness and compassion. I was kind of stretched between two worlds, because I work in technology and I love to play video games, but I also like to go on silent retreats and like practice self-awareness and explore the territory of the mind. And what I found was that my peers in technology, as you say, were a little utopian about it. Like, technology is going to come and be an epic provider and create abundance and all our problems will be solved. But meanwhile, my peers in the kind of mindfulness and wellness space were sort of like technology is bad and it's wrong and it's, destroying our children's lives and it's ruining our lives. And I couldn't really align with both. So just by force, I ended up spending my adult life experimenting with, how to love technology and live mindfully at the same time.
Mm. I love that. I love that. And I think one of the unique insights that I've read you talk about is how we use technology to actually satisfy an emotional need, and probably do this quite unconsciously. When did you realize that dynamic?
It's a good question. Um, I'm trying to think. It feels like it was a gradual journey. And what comes to mind are certain examples of technologies that I sort of practiced awareness and had a bit of an epiphany with, or an insight. So one would be around video games, since we've already mentioned them. You know, I really do think video games are a form of art. Like, I've had such beautiful experiences with video games. But I think I was playing a game called Rocket League. Um, and I'd been playing for like an hour and a half or something. And I had this like spark of awareness where I noticed that I felt awful. Like
Mm.
I was like contracted and tense, and I had like a headache, and I was like frustrated. Trying to play this game, and I think in the moment I was sort of like, this is not fun. Like, I'm not having fun with this game, and so like I kind of turned it off and sat for a moment with that, and realized like I wasn't playing Rocket League in a fun way. It was almost compulsive. Like, and through the next couple of days of unpacking that, I realized like there was something challenging in my day to day life that was like I wasn't getting a sense, like I was being frustrated at work a little bit and in my relationship. And there was something this game was providing, which was this like really instantaneous feeling of, flow and achievement that was really just an escape from trying to find that in my real life. And I think what that evolved into is an understanding that there's nothing wrong with Rocket League. Rocket League is a fantastic game, but the way I was using it in that moment was problematic. And another example that really arrives for me is actually with my son, Oliver, who's 5 now. This happened, I think, when he was maybe 2 or 3, where he was playing with an iPad. And something about when he played with the iPad made him really irritable and difficult to manage afterwards. But here's the weird part: before we sort of say, oh, technology's bad for kids, he didn't have that reaction when he watched shows on TV. There was something about the iPad, or even when he played video games on the Switch, which was like on a TV, there was something about the iPad. And at first I thought, oh, maybe it's because he's kind of leaning over it and looking at the screen close. But I realized like the games he was playing on the iPad were all games that were making fine motor control really easy for him. Like, you drag something somewhere, you let go, and it automatically, like, I remember he drags this fruit to a blender, and then it automatically goes into the blender. He drags another fruit. Whereas in real life at that age, he's actually working on fine motor skills, and it was really hard for him, like, to actually position something exactly where it needs to go. And I kind of had this moment where I think what's happening here is that he's really loving how easy the iPad is making fine motor movement. But then when he stops using the iPad, actually manipulating things in the real world was twice as frustrating for him. And that to me is like a microcosm of how we all sometimes are using technologies that can be perfectly fine for one person, but the way we're using it, we might be trying to escape a challenge that we're facing or get away from a problem that we're dealing, or maybe they're simplifying our lives with an illusion of something we're looking for, but actually replacing our motivation to go find it in our real lives, like social media and a real social life, for example.
Yeah, that's what definitely came up for me, is like how things like dating apps and I remember when I was single and I was on the apps, I was having a bunch of conversations, I was getting a bunch of validation, I was feeling a sense of connection and, really just acceptance. Even though I wasn't meeting these people, I was just swiping and, sliding into the DMs. And yeah, I think it's a really interesting inquiry, right? To just reflect on some of these habitual patterns that we have and look at it at a deeper level. Like, I'm curious how you do this, but get to the root of like, well, what is the emotional need, or what am I actually doing this for? How do you do that?
One thing that comes to mind right away, which, I feel like we all know, but I've had a couple of people who've read the book like point this out to me as like a moment where they realize something. And I find it weird because it feels like something that everyone knows, but something about pointing it out has been powerful for people, which is that, a lot of the interface metaphors we use, like I'm a designer by trade, right? So I think about user interfaces and user experience a lot. And a lot of the metaphors we use on our interfaces, we use words that are meant to describe something much deeper than what they actually describe in the digital world, right? So, like in that example of the dating app, all it takes someone like a girl to see your beautiful face on the platform. This guy looks all right, swipe right. It's like literally less than a second. And then we receive that validation and it feels like, oh, I've been accepted and this person likes me. But that's not what it means. It means they swiped right after looking at your face for 0.6 seconds, right? And we see this online all the time. Like we have a text conversation, but it's not a conversation, right? We get like a like, but we don't actually know if someone even read the post, right? We get a view on our video, but they may have watched the first 10 seconds and gone somewhere else. And so there's like this asymmetry that this technology is creating for us, where we're all like, looking at each other's posts, reading the first sentence, clicking like, moving on. And no one's actually connecting with each other. We're all just assuming that other people are reading our content and we feel connected. And that's something that, like, yes, an in-person relationship, you're kind of forced to be authentic. But I actually think that you can have authentic relationships online if the design considerations or even the community guidelines or whatever you're a part of is one that actually promotes deeper engagement. Like when someone reads one of my Substack posts and writes me like a multi-paragraph reply about their thoughts and reflections, that feels like an authentic connection. They really read that and thought about it. And even though it's like a letter and there's no video, there's no face-to-face, there's authenticity there. So it is possible digitally too.
It almost makes me think about someone coming up with like a digital set of core values, or making sure that their own personal values are displayed and in how you behave digitally. Because I'll be the first one to share, like, I'll see my friend post something and I'm like, oh, that person's my friend. I want them to feel good and like me. I'm just going to like it, and that is kind of a little out of integrity now that I think about it.
It is what it is. It's how the system works. And this is a perfect microcosm for what we were talking about earlier, which is on the ground level, there is an ability for each of us, and this is what I try to do in my interactions with technology, is to have an authentic relationship with technology. And so I try to find those opportunities, like you just had that insight about the way you're liking a post. And that might lead you to change the way you do that in the future. And really, this is what I've been doing for 10, 15 years, is like considering these things. Like one of the practices that have come up for me is sometimes I'll go on social media with the explicit intention to help people feel that feeling of feeling validated and seen. And what I'll do is I'll say, I'm going to set aside 30 minutes. It's almost like a meditation practice. Like I'm going to set aside 30 minutes to like read a bunch of tweets. I'm really going to read them and I'm going to send thoughtful replies. And I'm going to focus on ones that don't have anyone else engaging. Like someone out there posted this. And it just gives me, and it may feel artificial, but genuinely leads me to interact and start to connect with people who I've never met before. And maybe we end up commenting and DMing and things like that. So there is a way to be online in an authentic, vulnerable, mindful, compassionate way. That being said, I also think there's an impetus for designers who create these platforms to think about those issues, to think about what a like means and what a friend means compared to what a friend actually is,
Mm.
and think about how we design these platforms to be a little bit better. And that's something I'm also interested in professionally as a designer. But you asked earlier, like, how I do this, right? Which I think is an important piece. And this is where the mindfulness comes in. Like, whether someone practices spiritually or practices mindfulness or not, it really, the neuroscience shows us like these are skills that we can develop. And so if the idea of taking it slow the next time you're interacting with your phone on social media and noticing your reactions and trying to be more intentional about it feels exciting to you, that's definitely it. Try to make space for choice and to not react and get sucked in the rails of how the experience is choreographing your attention, and maintain some space and authenticity. But if that feels inaccessible to you, then I think the first step is to work on that skill, which is what practices like journaling and mindfulness and even therapy and other spiritual paths can help you work on.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation so far. If you like what you hear, let me know by clicking like, subscribing to the channel, and responding with a comment around something that you found interesting in the conversation so far. In addition to these videos, I do a lot of writing on the exploration of consciousness and my own personal revelations in my newsletter called Consciousness, the Doorway to Human Evolution. To receive these updates and more, all you need to do is simply head to the link in the description below and you'll be added to the community of 20,000 plus consciousness explorers receiving weekly ideas and inspiration in their inbox. I look forward to hearing from you there. Now let's get back to the show. Yeah, I love this idea. And I think, one of the interesting things that's coming up for me is I see the way that a lot of people kind of deal with the situation is they do things like, all right, I'm going to block this app from my phone. I'm just not going to engage. It's like very like black or white. And it doesn't really accommodate room for nuance. And I think a lot of people find a sense of dissatisfaction where it's like, well, there's actually parts of, going on X that I like, or I don't feel like I know what's going on in my friends' lives as much when I don't go on Instagram. And it makes me just think about how like there isn't really a training ground that onboards us how to use these things as a way for self-awareness, as a way to make them enjoyable, and we kind of just get like thrown into the herd and then like, F this, I need to get out.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, we should start that training ground. You and me, let's do it.
Let's do it.
But I think, a metaphor that, I don't know, sometimes we just feel like things should be easy, and things are not easy, right? Like when our ancestors moved to a new plot of land or like crossed an ocean, they had to kind of learn all kinds of new practices and skills to survive in their new environment. And I think our generation of that is the collective migration online, right? Like we have to figure out what kind of practices, what kind of rituals, what kind of way of life makes sense for this new world that we're in. We've actually gone inward because the internet is a collective mind. So as opposed to crossing an ocean, we've gone inward to this intersectional, connective digital life. And our old practices and skills aren't really applying for every aspect of this life. And so we do need to experiment and explore, and we don't have those skills. But ultimately, like, when I was starting to think about this, tech was still in its honeymoon period and everyone was just in love with their technology. And even my wife like looked at me like these were conspiracy theories, like just let people enjoy their phone. And I was like, I think it's bad for us, right? But it's been 10 years since then, and the conversation has gone mainstream. And I think most people are quite aware of the potential privacy issues, the polarization issues, the potential mental health issues of all this technology in our lives. But I think the thing that we're still failing to realize is you can go right now and you can find a million different strategies. Delete that app, get the phone out of your bedroom, customize your home screen, all these different things. But your ability to apply those strategies comes from self-awareness, right? Only by you paying attention to your own emotional needs and your habits are you going to know whether you need to delete that app or simply have it on your laptop only and not your phone, or move it off the home screen, or restrict it, or just enjoy it, right? There's some apps we can just enjoy. And with self-awareness, I might know that I need to get rid of Rocket League, but there's other video games on there like Zelda Breath of the Wild that I can play, and it's a purely joyful way to not only unwind at the end of a tough day, but connect with my son who watches me play, right? Like, so I think we lose something when we're like, games are bad because Rocket League, I personally was using in a twitchy way. All of a sudden, all games, this entire corpus of human made interactive art that is incredibly playful and connectivity, we're going to throw it all out because I was going through a tough patch and got addicted to Rocket League. You know what I mean?
I appreciate you bringing this up, man, because again, back to the black or white thing, I noticed that there are people that, tend to identify as like, oh, I'm a spiritual person, I'm a healthy person, I'm a mindfulness person. And if I'm that, then I don't play video games for an hour, or they throw the baby out with the bathwater completely. And yeah, you do. There's probably some good things that come of that, but you do lose some things. You do lose the fun of just playing a video game. And yeah, I think, to your point, like awareness, step one, but then also grace, then also allowing yourself to just enjoy and being really intentional about that, I think is a beautiful, beautiful thing that a lot of people, probably myself included, would benefit from that attitude.
Yeah, I think there's something about that self optimization that creeps into health and well being where we start to lose the joy, right? And the metaphor might be like there's forcefully making yourself exercise out of shame and guilt because you're fat and out of shape and you think you're ugly. And then there's like finding the joy of moving your body, and which of those two strategies is going to lead to a lasting habit and integrated life, right? It's the same with tech, I feel. And yeah, there are definitely benefits. I certainly have gotten a lot out of like putting my tech away and going on multi-week meditation retreats away from that world. But I agree with you in that like there's actually, I would take it one step further, even like, so not only is there great things you can enjoy with technology, right? And there's also things that we kind of need to do. Like those people tend to have to use email and like video calls. And it can be sort of a source of cognitive dissonance, like a sort of disorganized attachment pattern where you're like secretly using technologies because you don't identify as a technology person, but then you kind of have to in modern life. But then I would even take it further, which is like if you look at where AI is going and you look at social media and all this technology, we need spiritual people in the tech conversation. Like we can't have all the spiritual people opting out of the
Totally.
tech conversation. And that's one of the big things that I'm like really passionate about as someone who, like I said, I work in technology, I play with technology. Like I said, my family are having video game parties once a week. And there's a lot of parents out there that are like, wait, what? But I'm like, yeah, we once a week sit down with our 5-year-old and we all enjoy video games. My wife plays one game, then when it's my turn, I play another game. My son is building levels, Mario Maker, whatever, right? Like we're just enjoying it. But then the rest of the week, we have strict screen time boundaries. He only does 30 minutes a day. But sometimes he pushes that, and I don't really care if he pushes it as long as he's the one who turns it off. He makes the choice himself so that he's learning to kind of manage his own habits. But, if we opt out and all the people who are wise opt out of technology, what's going to happen? We're all going to have to hide in a mountain somewhere while the world gets more and more problematic and unaware as they sort of, like you said, follow that herd into somewhere where no one individual of the herd wants to go. Right. So yeah, I'm with you, but I would take it a step further.
Yeah, I think the tension is, what comes up for me is like the take what's useful, discard the rest as we approach these things. And I think just how a lot of people feel is like they're just so set up to fail that that's impossible.
Yeah.
It's like, well, yeah, I guess I could apply this like uber attentive mindfulness to all my internet activities and I could make this work for me. But like, that's just like not my natural way, and it's just too freaking hard. So I'm just going to throw it out.
That's a really insightful point that you're making. And I think it's really important to highlight for anyone who might feel that way that the vision here, I actually did go through a time where that's what I tried to do, where I tried to be like, well, my whole life is going to be like monastic retreat mode. I'm going to practice mindfulness anytime I interact with technology. It wasn't the way. It really wasn't. It led to a lot of strict self-binding. It cut out a lot of joy. And honestly, like you said, I felt set up to fail because it was not possible. I think thinking about technology the way a meditator thinks about their thoughts is really instructive. So when I teach someone or guide a beginner to practice mindfulness, inevitably in one of the first sessions, they'll say something like, I can't do this. My thoughts are too wild. I can't shut my mind up and it sucks, right? That is just sort of like a negative valence. And what I will often say is, the goal is not to shut your mind up, right? The goal is not to stop thinking. That would be like telling a chicken not to cluck, right? It's like who we are. Thinking is who we are. And in that way, I really do believe technology is kind of who we are. But how do we relate to it better is not like being like studiously mindful in every single moment of interaction, but like we were talking about earlier, keeping an eye out for those moments of insight where you become aware of some habit pattern that you're engaged in or some emotional need that you're trying to feed with an illusion. And the moment you become aware, just try to stay aware of it once in a while, and your behavior naturally starts to change, right? So when I became aware of that moment where Rocket League was messing with me, it wasn't like, oh, well, now I'm going to have to be really super vigilant every time I use Rocket League. Because I had seen that light, Rocket League kind of lost some of its power on me, right? And so the goal is not to be mindful every moment, but whenever you can and you have a bit of energy, can you see clearly what emotional needs you have, what you're trying to do, what your habit pattern is, and where you might be kind of, going in circles? And if you see that even once, your relationship with that technology will start to change in a natural way. That's the power of awareness that that sort of undoes the whole like grind it out mentality into something. Just see clearly and let go of any other plan for now. That's what I would tell to that person. Just see clearly, see as clearly as possible, and let go of anything else.
I love that. I love that. And one of the ideas that you share in the book that really resonated with me, that I've experienced that phenomenon, is rejecting false urgency. And so maybe we can just start by outlining what that concept refers to.
Yeah. So in my experiments with everything from like work email and Slack to video games, but also the news, trying to stay abreast of the political situation, which happens to be coming to a head right now between our two countries. I'm in Canada, as you know.
Supposedly we might be one country. I kid, but this is what the news will tell you.
Yes, that's right. We're going to be. Well, I was thinking actually maybe there was a speech from Elizabeth May, the leader of the Green Party in Canada, who was like, "What if California, Oregon, and Seattle and all became part of Canada? Then Trump, you wouldn't have to worry about all these lefties." Anyway, so
that's funny.
So anyway, there's a lot going on in the news. There's a lot going on at work. There's a lot going on, and as I experimented with different strategies, what I kind of kept coming to and realizing was that the core illusion that makes a lot of this problematic is false urgency, is this idea that like that message on Slack needs to be read now and action now. That news article is a crisis that's happening today, right? This like emergency needs to be addressed. And it's like phrase, like the headlines are like, you simply cannot miss this. This is happening now. And then we all kind of are like riding as close as we can to what's happening today in the news with no regard for like how urgent these issues actually are in our own lives. And what it causes is this like intense pace of life that is just overwhelming. And the other thing it causes is that when there are legitimate emergencies, they don't seem like a big deal because it's like, so and so said something to so and so in government, and that's an emergency. And then, like, there's a wildfire or climate change, that's an emergency too. And it's like one of those things is legitimately an
Mm.
emergency that's happening now. And the other is like hearsay in a room that we're all going to forget about in 2 days anyway. And so I've been working on a lot of strategies in different categories of technology. But the insight there is once you start to see that, you start to be able to groom and customize your notifications and feeds to match the level of urgency that are required in your life. And oh boy, it is such a sigh of relief to be like, the news from this channel is coming at the right pace for what I
Mm.
need it. And the messages from this channel are coming at the right pace. And also, hey, this particular channel is consistently delivering me false urgency. Like it looks like an emergency, but it's not. So I'm just going to unsubscribe from that one. That's also a key benefit of this way of thinking.
I love that. I love those practices. And I also think that this can be an incredible gateway to, healing and transformation. I'll give you an example in my own life where I used to get voice notes and I used to find them very annoying because I'm like, shit, now I got to stop what I'm doing. I have to listen to this voice note and then I have to send one back. And it's just much harder to do than, sending a text message while you're on a Zoom call. And there was this urgency around getting back to people that was really grinding me. And I started to go into that, through some of my practices and realize that there was a deep fear that no one would like me and I would be judged if I didn't get back to them quickly, even though there was no explicit expectation that I needed to get back to them. And so ultimately I spent some time resolving that, just structure in my consciousness. And now it's like voice notes are amazing. It's like, I'll get to them when I get to them. Sometimes it'll take a week, a day, a couple days. And it's this delightful way of communicating asynchronously. And the only thing that changed was the information in my consciousness.
Beautiful. It's such a beautiful example for a number of reasons, right? There's the false urgency that you were feeling. And then there was your skillful identification of the deeper emotional need that was being addressed, which then empowered you to take a more effective strategy to address that need, which in your case was to see it clearly, notice its emptiness, let it pass and unwind. And then at the end, you reconnected with the very same technology, like making it very clear that in this case, it wasn't the technology, it was your relationship with it. And it was one that was grounded in some kind of fear or guilt or shame. And that's really like at the heart of what I've learned in these like 10, 15 years of experimenting with this, is that the fear and the guilt and shame are not helping us. And so yes, we need our technology to be better, but all the fear we have that it's ruining our lives, or the guilt we have pulling out our phone in a social situation, or the shame we have with like the amount of time we spent on TikTok, or what, screen time statistics or whatever, like this is not the way forward to like an integrated humanity technology situation where we're using the tools to be better people. We're letting go of the tools that are not helping us in that way, and we're being compassionate to each other, that like I might be enjoying voice notes while you're struggling with them and vice versa. And it's not about the technology. It's really about the way we interact with them. And I think the future of technologists and designers and entrepreneurs and engineers is to design for that situation, is to design for one that acknowledges those deeper emotional needs and doesn't try to trigger them at force. But that's a thornier problem.
Yeah, well, that is like, well, what is the underlying, economic system that we're in? What role does that play in this?
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, a lot of this addictive behavior is just people just following the system that has been designed, because that's what the incentives are.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like I think a lot of great people are working on systems change, and I'm involved with that as a tech designer. Some names like the Center for Humane Technology and the Digital Wellness Institute are thinking about how these systems need to change in government, in corporation, the science. You probably know John Haidt released a book called The Anxious Generation, which was really kind of influencing about phones in schools and with children. There's also a great book that less people know called Unlocked by Pete Etchells, which sort of presents the case that the science isn't clear enough yet for us to be banning technology for kids. And so there's a bit of a debate that's ongoing in this space. But ultimately, like, I think we collectively have a project to figure out new models and systems and new incentive structures to be able to create, nurture, and grow the kind of technology that's really going to integrate with humanity in a better way, because in some ways we're kind of struggling with that right now. I think my big message in this right now is that as individuals, we don't have to wait for someone to come save us, right? Like, I think a lot of these narratives, like the Center for Humane Technology produced an amazing documentary called The Social Dilemma, maybe five,
I've
6 years
watched it.
ago. Yeah, and it was awesome for getting the word out. But I remember watching it because I'd already been passionate about these issues. And I love that it was taking kind of mainstream appeal. But my big gripe was it felt like a horror movie.
Yeah.
Like the soundtrack was really dark, and it was like these big companies are coming to take everything that you hold dear, and it was like, that's not really what's happening here. And what it does is it teaches everyone that there's nothing they can do, like that we're powerless against these massive systems. But the issues of the attention economy are happening in your kitchen. They're happening in your living room. They're happening in your bedroom. They're happening in mundane moments of everyday life. They're happening at work. These are areas where, sure, there's a norm and there's systems, but you are not powerless. Far from it. Your ability to relate with those situations is a matter of choice. And it's also a matter of skill. Like I said earlier, if someone tries that and feels like it's impossible, that's where tools to strengthen your ability to pay attention, to practice awareness, to practice self-compassion, and to gather insight can be really essential to skilling you up so that you are able to relate better with technology in daily life. So long and short of it is, I don't have the solution to the system problem, but I'm helping work on it with some amazing peers in the space. But as individuals, we are not powerless in this situation. That's the big takeaway.
I love that message. And I also think, I would just tack on that, like, technology can be, with that in mind, like, technology can be a continuous gateway for awareness and transformation. It can be a spiritual companion to your path. And it has been for me, right? And it all comes back to what you said, which is understanding our relationship to it, and then using the situations that indicate that there might need to be something to be examined.
Would you have any examples offhand of like what kind of technologies have been your companion in your own mental health?
Oh, I mean, just a
self-development?
really simple one. We're in a big group chat together. It's like how I relate to that group chat.
Yeah.
It's like, do I notice myself incessantly looking after I post a message whether people are liking my thing? When no one likes my thing, what shows up? Do I feel like I need to participate when I'm not participating? And all these things come back. All these perceptions and feelings and emotions are indicative of something in my consciousness that is creating that relational way of seeing. And so, those situations aren't freedom, like that I described, like when you're like having to check whether people liked it, or you're worried if you didn't do this or do that. And so, like, if you seek to move closer to freedom, you use those situations. You go and you understand, like, why am I relating to it that way? And so, yeah, man. And for me, it's been, there's just like countless permutations of that can be applied to like all this digital stuff.
Yeah, you're revealing something really, really interesting. Like, first of all, like when I think about that equivalent for me, like making a post and looking for the reactions or whatever, it's a great microcosm of what we're talking about, right? Because it's easy to get, first of all, wrapped up in the desire for that, i.e., I'm working really hard to make the post that I think people will react to, as opposed to just sharing something authentic, right? Like, I'm like, oh, this is what people are going to click on. That's why I'm posting, right? So there's a motivation. I think you had Corey Muscara on. I listened to that episode.
Yeah.
It was great. And he was talking a little bit about like noticing the motivation behind your actions. And that's very much in line with this emotional need stuff, right? why am I posting is a great first question, right? But
Totally.
then there's the element, like you said, of like, oh, how compulsively am I checking to see if people responded, and why am I doing that? What is the emotional need that's driving that behavior? But then the part that I also want to add is it feels good when people react and comment to your post, and that's not a bad thing either. That we don't have to like shame ourselves or demonize social media because that feels good. It feels great. Like when you share a thought, especially if it's an authentic thought, and you come back and tons of people have responded to it and a couple of people are commenting. It's a beautiful feeling. Why is that beautiful feeling lesser than any other beautiful feeling? Like, one of the things that I'm really enjoying is seeking authentic relationships, not only in person but online, because they are possible. Now they're not the norm, and sometimes the design feels like it's pushing against that, but they are possible.
100%. I agree with you. And I think, yeah, making room for both in your life is maximum enrichment.
Yeah, and your mention of like how technology as a companion kind of reveals something to me as well, which is, I've been talking and talking about how a lot of this writing that I've been doing has been coming from these 10, 15 years of experimenting with technology in my own life as a part of my mindfulness practice. But that's really half the story, because the other half is, as you know, I've been working on technologies for mindfulness, right? Like trying to create wearables and apps and things in the evidence-based psychedelic space, compassionate benefits programs, video games for ADHD, all kinds of technologies. And so what what is implicit to me from my professional experience is I've seen time and time again that you can create technologies that dramatically change lives for the better. Like it is
Mm.
possible for sure. I remember when we launched the Muse headband, where I was sort of leading product for and user experience to launch that thing. I remember noticing that because we had this like thread of all the reviews that were coming in, right? So when someone left a review on the product, and I remember noticing like a 5-star review for the Muse headband, the comment beside it would be like, I feel more calm, I feel more at ease, I'm a better mother, I'm more present for my family, like beautiful things that would keep me motivated. But a 5-star review for like, just the movie theater app, it's like, oh, that's great, I can buy movie tickets or whatever. It's like,
Yeah.
the 5-star reviews are not created equal, I guess, right? But I think there's something in my professional experience which you're pointing to, that I'm realizing in this moment, which is like so much of what allows me to speak in this way is it's like a foregone conclusion for me that technology can be a companion in our spiritual journeys, because I've been working so hard on designing technologies for that. And I've basically been convinced that it's possible. And what if that was the mainstream technology, right? What if,
Mm.
Facebook was, I guess 20 years ago now, was just designed with that, instead of that incentive of just getting as many clicks and views as possible, if somehow we could go back and actually prioritize more authentic connection in our design workshop for the Facebook home screen, like that's what I think we need to do with AI in the next generation. How do we get that lens into the design conversation about the future of AI and technology? I think it could be an incredible boon for technology. And if all the spiritual people avoid technology, I don't think we're going to get there.
Yeah, 100%. Because I think Joe Hudson said this on the podcast. I totally agree. Like the consciousness of the company creates the products, right? And so it's a pretty pretty one-to-one relationship. And yeah, we need people that are seeking wisdom in their life internally, to be at the helm of, or not at the helm, but just contributing to the creation of these things.
Yeah, like I think it's a healthy tug of war. We've got, I mean, I know this as a kind of human-centered designer focused on experience design, like it's a tug of war between like what the organization needs and what the people we're trying to serve need. And uh, I think there's like a path that we need to take towards more holistically thinking about the latter, like not just thinking about what do they need so they can like complete this conversion process and buy the product. It's like, what do they need, dot, dot, dot.
Yes.
And like the closer, I mean, it's tough with our incentive structures, but the closer we can line up our organizations and our design process to include a wider end of that sentence, I think the better our technology will become. And I mean better in a deeper way than just like, easier to use or, more sticky.
I'm with you, man. I
Yeah.
love it. And I think this is a good place to be continue this conversation for a future time. Jay, I want to just give you the opportunity for people who found this conversation interesting, to learn more about the book as well as just some of the work that you're doing in the world.
Yeah. If you just Google my name or go to jvidyarthi.com, it's basically got the book and all the links you need and everything about me and a contact form. So if anyone has questions, feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
I have checked out Jay's book. It is worth the read, especially if this is something you're thinking about in your life. And so that will be linked in the show notes to make it easy to check out if this is an interesting topic to you. Thanks again, Jay. This was a lot of fun, man.
Amazing, man. This was great. Good to see you.